Opa! I think that's Greek, but it still counts halfway. It counts halfway. You know, what do we say? I don't know. It's just ciao. That's what we say in Italy. I was just there for ciao, ciao. Ciao! Ciao, ciao. It doesn't have, I'll give the Greeks that one. You got to give them something. What? Hairy chest and Opa? What? I mean, come on. That's good stuff. Let's talk about humility. Hey, week 4 of the secret sauce. We've been talking about humility. Anybody remember the definition we've been using? Awesome. Humility, it's only week 4, so you know it's hard to lock these things down. Humility is a willingness to hold power in service of others. And we talked last week, right? This isn't about abandoning your power. It's not about letting your power go. It's not about hiding from power, right? Getting behind something like, don't give me power. Power is bad. It's not about demonizing power. It's about holding your power. And it's not just about holding your power either, right? It's not just about holding your power and just holding it and just holding it and just keeping it for yourself and just holding your power. We like to do that, right? That one we like to do. It's not about holding your power either. It's about holding your power in service of somebody else. Another word we talked about last week we could use instead of hold, we could use. How are you using your power in service of others? Or maybe more specifically, we could say, how do you use your power to lift those around you up? Everybody look at your neighbor and say, lift them up. Now look at the neighbor you don't care about or don't care to lift up quite as much as the other side and say, lift them up. Okay, there we go. Now, you know, we like to lift all the neighbors up. And we talked about Jesus and the way Jesus modeled humility last week. And we could say again, right, talk about the most powerful human to walk on planet Earth. The dude is walking on water. You know, when was the last time you saw somebody walking on water other than the new, like, bungee things these days? You know what I mean? You ever seen? No? Nobody else? You've seen those, you know, the new things where you do. You know, I'm not going to do it. I'll say, yes, I am. You do like this thing, you know, like that on the water, and then you just, it's like, but Jesus is walking on water without one of those. That's the point. Jesus is walking on the water, and then he's taking 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he's doing what? Feeding 5,000 people. Then he did it on the other side. He's like, you want me to see you do it again? He liked that magic trick a lot. So he's like, I'll run that one back. So he ran that one back on the other side of the lake. We'll talk about that in a couple weeks from now. That's going to be a really good one. You want to be here for that. And, but he right, you're talking about power. And I think if you or I got that type of power, what would we do? Typically, we'd go on some type of superhero bender, right? We'd just be doing all these things for our own self. Like if I could multiply bread and fish, I could probably multiply money. If I could multiply money, I'm going to use that money. I'm going to invest it on the stock market, and I'm going to multiply the stocks that I invested in. Amen, hallelujah. We're going to get houses. I'm going to be multiplying my own house. I'm going to multiply, a bunch of things. We'll multiply everything. This is going to be awesome. If I could walk on water, I'd be using that trick to get more money. I mean, am I just about money in this scenario? I guess, don't act like you're any different, But Jesus, who has the most powerful, thank God, right? He wasn't just the most powerful human on earth. He also happened to be God in the flesh, right? So he brings the God-like mentality, and instead he uses his power to what? To just bolster himself up? No. What do we see Jesus do? He heals he heals the lame. He heals the blind. He actually sits and hangs out with what the people around him called sinners. Thank you. I love it when Doug shows up to church because he got all the answers. He's like, I've been reading this Bible. Anybody else? Okay, so Doug's a Bible reader, everybody. Give it up for Doug. He helps the lame. He sits down. He hangs out with the people of low perception within his day. In other words, he often, almost always, used his power to lift others up. Everybody say, lift them up. Ooh, so how are you using your power to lift others around you? When we look at this definition of humility, what's that definition again? A willingness to hold power in service of others. We can really see it broken down into 3 categories. I want to walk down each category with you today. The first category is this: a willingness to hold power. Everybody say power. Everybody say, I got the power. Thank you. We got one. We got one with me. He's like, I'll shoot. I'll sing it out of tune like you. We'll do this thing together. But it's power. And if we stopped on power and just said, what really do you mean? What's the power thing all about? And I want to break it into 4 quick categories for you. Number 1, what is power? Power is a question about talents. And I want to ask you the question. Listen to the question. When do I use my talents to lift others up? What's your talents? These are your unique abilities. These are unique strengths. These are the things that seem very common to you, but when you talk to other people, they're like, how do you do that? I don't even know how you do it. It's like, that's your talent. You just found it right there. How are you using those specific talents that are uncommon to others? What are those things? How do they serve you? And how do you use them to lift others up? The second one is time. What time do you use to lift other people up? Every single one of us have 168 hours in a week. Some of y'all are walking around. We'll do this a whole nother time too. Some of y'all are walking around going, I don't have enough time. Yes, you do. You're just wasting it. That's 168 hours every single week, and that recycles. We all have time. And not only how are you using that time for your own self and for your own betterment, for your own family, how are you using that time to lift other people up? Thirdly is my energy. When is your energy or when is my energy used to lift other people up? I am crazy about energy management. I love time management, but I graduated from time management a long time ago. I'm on to energy management, y'all. And energy management is it's what I give my life to. And what I give my life to, I am very, very, very serious about, right? I'm specific about that energy thing. But when am I using my energy, not just for my own self and not just to build my own little kingdoms up, but when am I using my energy to lift someone else up? Someone said, lift them up. And then finally, this one I know we're all going to love in this room. When do I use my money? How do I spend my money to lift others up? Oh, you're like, I can tell you how I spend my money. Oh, to lift others up. Oh, shoot. Right, how do I spend my money to lift others up? And so we kind of have here a willingness to hold power. What's your power? Your power is your talents, your time, your energy, and your money. And here's the good news. We all have it. You've all got the power. You all have the power to lift somebody else up in some way, shape, or form. And really, you all have it. We all have it in every category in some realm. But you might be a little less on other realms and higher on other realms. But you have time, you have talent, you have money, you have energy. And if you didn't, then you'd be dead. And luckily, you're in the room. We alive. So you have it. You have the power. I was just inspired by a couple stories this week. And I didn't tell my wife that I was going to share this story until this morning. She found out first service. She wasn't very happy with me. I don't care. Sorry, not sorry. But she inspired me in this way of using her time, her talent, and her energy. This week, she saw a post from somebody in our community, somebody we know of, and they saw, she read this post. They're moving. Their 2 kids are sick. Their house was a mess. All this unorganization, just really messy, really bad moment. They're trying to get from the apartment to a house. All these things going on in the week. A couple things you should know before, about my wife is she's an organizer. She's literally she's professionally organizing right now. She's helping clean houses. She's doing all these things. In other words, this is her specific, unique talent, her gift, gift. Talent. This is her specific talent right now. We've moved 8 times in 8 years. 8 times in 8 years we moved, and we didn't have no military packing people come to the house, so y'all cheat, okay? If that's what you're talking about, you're like, us too. No, you cheat. You cheated. Someone came in and did it for you. We did it. And she primarily figured out, so she has these systems of how she moves, and now people who know us, they always be tagging her, how did you do this? How did you come help me do it? So this week, she sees these people, and she takes 4 hours out of her day on Monday, and she goes and she brings all of her cleaning supplies, and she brings some of her organizing things, and she's down, she's vacuuming floors, she's scrubbing floorboards to help get this apartment cleaned up and ready and moved, and spent time and energy and talent on doing that. Another story was a guy from our church as well. His name's Daniel Powell. Daniel Powell, if you're in the house, shout out to Daniel Powell. If you're not here, why are you skipping church? Got him. I didn't know you were going to share the story. You never do. Okay, Daniel Power is here last week after Fall Fest, and he was out and he listened to a mom talking to a kid about how they didn't have the Halloween costume. And they didn't have the Halloween costume, so he started asking, why don't they have a Halloween costume? She said, oh, we just weren't able to get it in time. In fact, I'm really paycheck to paycheck right now, and we don't have the money in time. In fact, they have the class parade, the class day where you dress up in class, for Halloween costumes. You know what I'm talking about. The class parade. And they didn't have time. She said, I don't have time before my next paycheck to get it, so I'll get it, but it's going to come late. It's going to come after the parade. It might even come after Halloween by the time I get the costume. So Daniel Powell right there, he goes, hey, you know what? I'm going to buy your kid a Halloween costume. We're going to prime it in. It's going to be here in time for the class parade. And somewhere in the news started to spread. And so Daniel Powell didn't just end up buying one costume for one kid. There was another mom that started to ask. There was a couple other parents that came up and said, we're in a tight spot too. A couple other ones. He ends up 6 deep. Well, NNY 360, local news article, they got wind of it and they reached out to him and they said, hey, we want to write this. He said, only if I'm able to extend the invitation to other parents. And so he did. So now, just at the last update, he's now bought 14 kids Halloween costumes who otherwise weren't going to have it. Yeah, that's right here. Isn't that incredible? That's inspiring. See, here's the point, right? The point is it could be cleaning an apartment for someone, or it could be buying children Halloween costumes. But anytime you use your talent, your time, your money, or your energy for someone else, you are enacting this secret sauce called humility, and you are lifting those around you up. And so the questions you can ask yourself for the first part of your power is, what is your time, or what is your talent? Where is your time, and what amount of energy, and how much money? And I want you to really pay attention to this word. How much money, how much time, how much energy, how much talent can you spend lifting others up? Now, how much money do I have to? No. Don't have to in the trash. How much money can you? How much money do you get to? How much power do you really hold that you could walk around and just go, oh, I lift you up. Oh, I'm going to lift you up. Oh, I get to lift you. Everybody say, lift him up. Everybody say, lift him up. You get to lift him up. You get to do this. This is a get to. This is a can. This is an awesome moment, an awe-inspiring moment. And so, if we have our power figured out, maybe you've got some of those things figured out. Maybe some of these questions get in your mind turning. Maybe one of the next questions we could ask when it comes to a willingness to hold power in service of others is, who are your others? This has everything to do with being in service of others. Now, everybody say others. Others. In service of others. And that's the question. Who are your others? Who are your others? Look at your neighbor and say, who's my other? Well, now you know the other person is. See what we did? Okay. Anyway, I thought that was cute. Remember, numerous times throughout the Gospels, the disciples said, we want to be the best. Remember, we talked about this. We want to be the greatest. Jesus never scolded them for wanting to be the greatest. He just gave them the recipe for how. He gave them the secret sauce for how. And I want to pull this verse up one more time. I want to pay attention to one specific word. It's a talent word. It's Mark 9:35. You can put that up. It says, sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of, everybody say it, all. Like, all, Jesus? You don't mean like all. Not. All? You don't mean all. You mean like most, some, a little bit. Serve it. So I want to ask you all, really, what about the ones who are really hard to love? What about the ones who are really hard to love in your day and age? In fact, there's a popular story from history that maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't, but it's about Daniel and Janet Matthews. They're from 3 generations ago in the 1860s. There's a couple named Daniel and Janet Matthews. And the others in their world were the Aboriginal people of Australia. These were Aborigines that were cast to the side. These Aborigines at the time in the 1860s, they were being shot for bounty, they were being raped at leisure, and they were being filled with alcohol for the fun of the spectacle. It was widely believed in Australian society at the time that the Aborigines were less than human. In fact, many people thought they were even devoid of a soul. And Daniel and Janet Matthews, they're living there in that area for about 20 years, and they were locals in the area. They owned a good, healthy business. It was a vibrant business. Business was good. They owned a really large plot of land that they had. And they were considered middle class or upper middle class, hard-working family, right? Maybe like some of us in our day and age. But one day Daniel came across these indigenous people, and it just like he said, it's like his eyes open, and he saw the amount of mistreatment. He saw the mocking. He saw the disgusting way that they were being treated, and he got home and he journaled that night about all that he had seen, and he concluded it with these words. He said, "My God, can this be right?" There's something that stirred in Daniel and it stirred in Janet from that day forward. In fact, people around him said everything changed from that day forward. And they began to enact change. One of the things Daniel was gifted at was his ability to communicate. So he began to write speeches. He performed a couple speeches, but more than that, he began to write letters to everybody that he could in the case and make a case for the Aborigine people. In fact, it's reported that he systematically wrote to every single newspaper and every government agency in the country, begging the Australian leaders and the public to change their attitudes toward the indigenous people. He began to spend time. He began to spend his time on writing and speech writing. But here's the beautiful part is they didn't just do it in words. They didn't just do it only in the areas they were talented in. Their actions followed suit. Daniel found out about this area of his land. The indigenous people actually called it Maloga, and they viewed it as a highly regarded piece of land. And so Daniel took his own property, his own land, and he gave a huge, massive chunk of it back to the indigenous people. In fact, and they called it Maloga Station. It was to be used for the Murray River people. It was no longer used for the Matthews commercial profit. Maloga became a safe haven for the Aborigines all over New South Wales and Victoria. The locals could freely hunt and fish there. It was one of their only spaces of freedom within all of Australia in the time. In fact, they didn't just do that. They began to give these people medical attention. Disease was rampant during that day and age. And so they sought after them and they began to give them medical attention. Janet was also a teacher, so she began to use her talents and her abilities to teach math, to teach reading and writing and math to help these people be lifted up so that they could go out and be successful in the world. They gave that European education through Janet and through her abilities. When the fish were low, they were also always assured of a meal, often cooked by Janet herself. If the fish were low or the hunting was scarce, they would come in and they would cook them meals themselves. And then from time to time, Daniel Matthews would also offer legitimate freedom to people. See, in that day and age, they had a custom where the typical person coming through the land who would settle, as a local settler, would actually tie up a young Aboriginal woman to their bed. And they would literally use them at their leisure. And Daniel Matthews, when finding out about it, decided that's not going to happen in his area. And he was known from going from place to place, and he would literally rip chains off, untie local young women, and get them to Maloga Station where they could enjoy and be in a place of freedom. This is what he did. This is what he was about. This is what they were about. It was an incredible testament of not just being about words, but being about actions, and specifically for the lowest people of their day. In fact, on more than one occasion, when he was going to free these women, he was shot at and he was beaten up multiple times for that. Despite the pleading of his brother William to concentrate more on the shop and less on Maloga, Daniel could not pull himself away. Matthew Brothers, the previously thriving business that they ran, went broke. Many of his contemporaries thought he was crazy, often saying, quote, "He's got black fellas on the brain," unquote. The friendship and affection the Aborigines felt toward Daniel Matthews is epitomized in the title they bestowed on him. They would call him Maranuka. It was a very special, intimate, close word for friend in their day and age. It captured so much of the relationship between Matthews and the indigenous people. In 1887, a journalist actually who found out about the work while it was happening came to do a piece on it. And he wrote this. He said, "The Superintendent Matthews, I gather from outside sources, has impoverished himself and his family, being forced to neglect his own material interest through his extra care and affection for the blacks. I left the place feeling that a life had been given away in devotion to the natives' welfare. But the Matthews never stated that. In fact, their journals and the things they wrote, they didn't feel like they had thrown their life away. In fact, oftentimes they believed they were holding their power and resources for the good of those who needed them most. They viewed it as empowering. They viewed it as awe-inspiring. They viewed it as this is what they were here to do. Daniel ultimately died in 1902, but Janet, whom he had long described as the reason he had been able to fight so long and so hard, she continued the work for another decade after her husband's death, even opening another 2 missions. The mark they both left on the Aboriginal people of Victoria, South Australia, and New South Wales was deep and long-lasting. Daniel Matthews' grave to this day has an inscription that reads, Maranuka, friend, his works do follow him. See, Daniel and Janet Matthews, they decided to love the unlovable. The most unlovable. The people they would be ridiculed for loving. The people on the far side of the fence. They decided to love those people in their world. And the question I want to ask you today is, who are your others in your life today? In fact, if I could zero in on this concept, I would say all of us in this room have 3 primary categories of our others in our life today. And I want to ask you the question and frame it in the sense of power. How are you using your talents, your time, your money, and your energy to serve? First, us. How are you serving the us in your life? Who's the us? That's you. That's your family. That's your coworkers. That's your neighbors. That's the us huddle. That's the crew that you couldn't ignore even if you wanted to ignore them. And often we do. We'd like to, but you can't. They can't. They won't go away. That's your us people. How are you using your talents, time, money, and energy to serve us? And by the way, if you haven't even gotten to us, then that's a great place to start. Start serving us with your time, your talent, your money, and your energy. But I want to take a step further. Now, who's the them? How are you using your talents, time, money, and energy to serve them? You know, them people. Them people aren't bad. They're just like the people on the other side of town, the people you don't think that often about, the people, the them that you walk by in Walmart every day and try to, not say anything, the them that you go through the drive-through in and you don't even really recognize or view them as human. You just like, give me your coffee, let me give you this card, this piece of plastic, let's get over with this transaction as soon as possible so I can get home to my nice bed. The them, right? The them that's really hard to see sometimes because you've got you in the way. Or because you've got this thing in your hand that like covers your face all the time, that like you're just staring at it everywhere you go, and you're like, oh, I don't know if them's a priority. I've never really thought about them because them doesn't exist between here and here. And when them does get in between here and here, I get really frustrated and angry, and I get full of anxiety because them just need to stay where them need to stay, which is out here on the outside, so that I could do me. All the young people over here piss off with the moms. Come on, brother. Come on, preach now. You done here? You heard that, right? They point at the young people. Oh, boy. But today, I want to ask the Daniel and Janet Matthews question. Let's go even one step further than us and them. When in your life are you actively using your talent, your time, your money, and your energy to serve those people in your life? You know those people. Just bringing them up the whole room like. What are you talking about, though? You told me, you brought me to church today. You said he wasn't going to talk about those people. If you would tell me you talking about those people, we would skip. We would came next week. But those people, you know those people, though, right? You know those people. We all got those people. Those people who think those things. You know those people. They don't just think those things. These people be crazy. They say those things. They'll post those things. They won't stop posting those things. Not only do they think those things, they'll say those things. You know what they do? Some of y'all might be, when you hear those people, colors come to mind, just random color. Like you'll think about blue, the color blue. Or maybe for some of you think about the color red. Those people. Those people that just talking about those colors stir something so deep inside of you. Surely not those people. And at this point in time, I just want to remind you a couple things. I want to remind you, number one, of Mark chapter 9, right? Mark chapter 9 is what we're talking about. It's Jesus talking to the disciples. And he said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of everybody. Say, oh, you mean us then, man. Those? No. The other thing I want to remind you of is that I didn't say it. I didn't write it. And I wouldn't have written it like that. I wouldn't have written us, them, and those. I wouldn't have written the word all. You know what I would have written? I would have written something like, if you're going to be the greatest, you have to serve those who you're in closest proximity to. Those who you know will eventually reciprocate love back towards you. That's what I would have written. And that's what I would have written if you called me on a good day. But I didn't write it. I didn't say it. I want you to remember, church. I want you to remember that we say we are Christians. Christians means Christ follower, meaning you're following this Jesus, this Yeshua from Nazareth, who said, all those people, you want to serve us, you want to serve them, and you're going to need to serve those. And not only did he say it, he did it. Dang, Jesus, you had to go on and do it. And not only did he do it, see, because we still would have had the best moment would have been if he left, go back to heaven, and the disciples didn't do it, then we all would have had a pass for the rest of eternity. But you know what his dang disciples did? They did it. And they did it so well. And so much in the face of the political and the religious spirits of the day that they were all 11 out of 12 were killed for it. And the 12th one, don't worry, there's no out. He got boiled alive, attempted to be boiled alive, and then he got exiled to an island. They all did it. Dang. They found a way to serve us, them, and those. And so all I'm saying to you, church, is if you're saying, I'm a follower of Jesus, of Yeshua Christ, I'm a follower of the way, anyone who wants to be fast must be the very last and the servant of all. Jesus' words, and more importantly, his wonderful life tells us that when we come along someone, when we come along somebody, when we come along anyone, whether it's the outsider, whether it's the wealthy, whether it's the poor, whether it's the marginalized, whether it's the political minded, whether it's the religious minded, whether it's the powerful, whether it's the lowly, whether it's the enemy, or whether it's the friend, that humility's call is for us to find a way to serve them. To serve us, them, and those. Yeah, you could give it up for that. And by doing so, we become great in the Jesus way. So, the question, who are your others? Have you become selective in who you will serve and who you won't serve? Or are you willing to serve all? Now, let's just imagine for a moment. Imagine you know your power. You've got your time. You've got your talent. You've got your money. You've got your energy. You've got this stuff dialed out. And then imagine that you're ready with your others. You're ready to go serve your us, your them, and your those. You're ready. You're geared up. Now, what's the last question that we can ask based on your willingness to hold power in service of others, the definition of humility? This is what I would ask. This is the last question I would ask. And it's this. Are you willing to serve? Simply serve. Not are you willing to do this hard, terrible thing and live this horrible life so that at the end of your time, maybe someone will get up on stage 150 years from now and tell your story to a church of 500 people that you never met and live in that glory. Not so that I'm going to buy a Halloween costume so that the local news picks it up. So that my spouse thinks great of me. No. You know how you know people who are willing to serve, like really just willing to serve? It's not when they're losing, it's when they start winning. That's when they're outed. And the question for you today is, what if you entered into life and just said, I'm willing to serve no matter what it looks like? I'm willing to serve. There's a young black woman who took a job in 1934 as a nurse's assistant. She did sewing on the side. She went out and got her high school diploma. She got a job as a secretary at an Army Air Force base. The base was integrated, so she felt valued and welcomed there. But every day she'd get on a bus and she'd drive into town, and the town would remind her of how unsegregated it was. The town would actually often remind her of just how unfairly treated she was every time she stepped off that base. And she knew there was something very seismic, there was something very different about the Army base she worked on and the town she lived in. This woman then joined the NAACP, that's the National Association of the Advancement for Colored People. She was the only woman in the room when she first showed up. She walked into a room, the group of men, she said, I'm here. I'm ready to help the advancement of colored people. Upon seeing a woman show up, the men asked, awesome, will you take notes? So she took notes. The next 12 years, in fact, she took notes. She became the acting secretary for the group. She represented one of the few active women in civil rights movement during those years. And she typed notes, she wrote letters, she organized meetings, and she helped people get registered to vote. And by the way, all those years, 12 years, she worked for the NAACP for completely free. Didn't take a dime. In her day hours, she worked to help clean white people's houses, and she worked on sewing at a tailor shop. On Tuesday, December 1st, 1955, as she headed home for her job, she took a seat on the same bus she took many days before, and the driver told her that she had to stand up so a white man could sit down. She later wrote a couple marked words about this moment. She wrote that the more we gave in and complied, she felt the worse they treated us. She also wrote a lot about how she wasn't an old woman like many people imagined by the time her life was over. She was 42 years old. She wasn't tired of a day's work. She said she worked hard every day of her life, and she was used to standing. No, Rosa Parks said, the only tired I was tired of giving in. Rosa Parks had had enough. Rosa was arrested, though. She was brought to City Hall. She was put in jail for refusing to give her seat to a white man on the bus that day. And on Monday, December 5th, 1955, Rosa Parks went to trial. But on that same day that she went to trial, a bunch of black people in Montgomery, Alabama decided they had also had enough. And they rose up and they said, we're not going to ride the buses any longer. And for one day, they didn't ride buses. They walked, they rode their bikes, they commuted to work, all to stand up for something very important to them. Except for it didn't just last for one day. Some say that never before had the black community of Montgomery united in protest, and certainly not this long. You see, the Montgomery bus boycott lasted for over an entire year. Many black people were fired from their job during this process, and that included Rosa. She was completely fired. But instead of just being fired, not having a job, news began to spread about this Montgomery bus boycott. In fact, it was getting so famous. In fact, it was getting so popular. They wanted to know who started it. And who had started it was the one, the only Rosa Parks. And so Rosa Parks went from working as a secretary for 12 years for the NAACP while cleaning white people's homes and sewing, and she got thrusted into the national spotlight. She was it. She became the face of the NAACP. For this season, she went all over the country. In fact, she made huge speeches at Madison Square Garden with thousands of people who showed up. She toured all over the country and spoke from church to church to church to church. She sat down and met Eleanor Roosevelt and sat and had conversations about how to unite the two groups of people who were segregated in their country. She spread the news. She shared the word. She raised funds to keep the boycott alive. And finally, on November 13, 1956, the United States Supreme Court stated that bus segregation was unconstitutional. In December of 1956, the black people in Montgomery, Alabama were ready to get back on the bus, but this time, they got to choose their seat. Rosa was one of the first to step onto a bus that day, and the seat she chose was right up front. This picture was taken. It's one of the most iconic photographs. It was taken on that day when she stepped back on that bus and sat up front. You see, Rosa had helped change the world. And yet, when this moment was all said and done, maybe the thing that illustrates her humility the most is that her husband, and her mother, they left Montgomery, Alabama, and they moved to Detroit. And Rosa, she went back to sewing. She said she wanted to get back to a quiet life. She got involved in a local church, and she continued to do work in civil rights. And you know what the work she did with civil rights? She took notes. She wrote letters. She organized meetings, and she helped people register to vote. Eventually, she got hired by U.S. House Representative John Conyers, and you know what she did? She sorted mail. She took notes. She organized meetings. She helped people find houses. Out of her own words, she said, it was much like the work I did for the 12 years I was secretary for the NAACP. Rosa was eventually given the Spring Arm Medal by the NAACP. In 1996, President Bill Clinton awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She received the Congressional Gold Medal in 1999. The same year, Time magazine called her one of the 20 most important people of the 20th century. She received awards, medals, and honorary degrees from all over the world. And when she died in October of 2005, over 4,000 people showed up to her funeral to honor a woman who showed the utmost humility in holding her power for the service of others and displaying that whether it was sorting mail, whether it was writing letters, whether it was finding a home or making a speech, she was simply willing to serve. She was in it to serve. My question today, are you willing to serve? Regardless of the job, regardless of the implications. Are you willing to go after and serve the greater cause, to love people and to stand for people? You see, if you hope to display humility in your life, to lift others up, I think you only need to answer 3 primary questions. And they go like this. What is your power? Who are your others? And are you willing to serve? See, it could be eloquent speeches. It could be vacuuming and scrubbing floorboards. It could be staying seated on a bus or making copies. It could be giving land back, buying Halloween costumes, or saving people from distress. But when you enact humility, it is much more of a forward-moving entity than it is a defensive, lowering posture. There is something powerful that happens, something that people are drawn to, something that lifts others up, something that is very, very worthwhile. In our Christianity, we would call it the secret sauce. Tap into that power. That's the encouragement. That's the encouragement of the whole series. Tap into that power. My encouragement is to go find humility. Learn to love humility and use it to lift others around you up. God, thank you for this service. Thank you for this group of people. Thank you for this community. God, I pray in light of all the other noise that this world throws at us, that this is the noise that we would be loud with. It would be the noise of humility. It doesn't show up. It's not a flash in the pan. It doesn't show up loud and boisterous. God, it shows up over years and years and years of consistency. It shows up because we're genuinely in it to love other people. Our us, our them, and our those. God, I pray that we would have a different scent, that we would look different, that we would act different, so different than what's being sold in so many other markets. And God, that when people ask us, what is it? We say, oh, we're followers of Jesus. He taught us about humility. and we're just following him on the path. I pray that it would do incredible and amazing things, both for us and for others, as we lift others up with the power of humility. I thank you for it. In Jesus' name.